At 75 years old, Hollywood legend Sissy Spacek remains one of the most respected and beloved actresses of her generation. From her chilling performance in Carrie to her Oscar-winning role in Coal Miner's Daughter, she has built a career defined by authenticity, emotional depth, and an unwavering commitment to her craft. But behind the awards, the praise, and the decades of iconic film work lies a story far more complex and far more heartbreaking than most fans ever knew. For years, Sissy Spacek quietly endured a series of deeply personal tragedies and painful sacrifices, the kind that never make it onto magazine covers or red carpet interviews. She experienced life-changing loss, unexpected health struggles, professional setbacks, and emotional battles that she kept hidden from the world while continuing to deliver breathtaking performances on screen. Even as Hollywood celebrated her talent, Spacek was fighting to hold on to the things she valued most: her family, her privacy, and her sense of self. Today, at 75, the full picture of her journey is finally coming to light, and it reveals a woman who has faced more sorrow than most people realize. Her story is not just about fame or fortune, but about resilience, heartbreak, and the quiet strength required to survive in an industry that often demands everything. This is the tragedy of Sissy Spacek, and why her journey, even now, remains one of the most emotional and inspiring stories in Hollywood. Sissy Spacek's journey into Hollywood wasn't born from privilege or connections. It was carved out of hardship, loss, and a quiet determination that would come to define her entire life. Long before the awards, the accolades, and the iconic roles, Spacek faced one of the most devastating tragedies a young person can experience: the sudden death of her beloved older brother, Robbie. She was only 17 years old when he passed away from leukemia, an event that shattered her world and left emotional scars that would follow her for decades. Robbie had been her guide, her protector, and her closest friend. He encouraged her creativity, supported her dreams, and helped her navigate the uncertainties of youth. Losing him wasn't just a personal heartbreak, it was the moment her childhood ended. Spacek would later admit that his death fundamentally reshaped her view of life, teaching her how fragile everything truly is. This early grief deeply informed the emotional intensity she would later bring to her most memorable roles, especially those dealing with pain, isolation, and vulnerability. But tragedy didn't push her away from the arts, it pushed her toward them. Determined to break free from the grief that consumed her Texas hometown, she moved to New York City with almost no money, no plan, and no connections. She worked odd jobs, slept in cramped apartments, and struggled to find her place. For a while, she pursued music, even recording a demo tape, but rejection became a familiar companion. Agents dismissed her, producers overlooked her, and countless auditions ended with the same phrase: "You're not the right fit." Yet, despite it all, Spacek refused to give up. Driven by a mixture of grief and ambition, she continued chasing her dream, one that seemed more impossible with each passing day. It wasn't until she met influential acting teacher Lee Strasberg and his daughter, Susan, that her life began to change. They saw something in her, a raw honesty, a vulnerability that couldn't be taught. With their support, Spacek found herself auditioning for roles she never thought she'd have access to. Still, even as opportunities slowly opened, Hollywood had doubts. Some executives questioned her unconventional look. Others believed she lacked the flashiness they preferred in young actresses. She didn't fit the mold. But Spacek's uniqueness would soon become her greatest strength. Her breakthrough moment would come with the horror classic Carrie, a role she almost didn't get. The studio initially wanted a more glamorous actress, someone who fit the stereotypical Hollywood beauty. Spacek's plain appearance was seen as a flaw. But she fought for the role, going so far as to arrive at her audition wearing no makeup, unwashed hair, and a simple, outdated dress. And in that moment, she didn't just act, she became Carrie. The performance launched her into stardom, but it also set the stage for a long career defined by her ability to channel deep emotional pain. Yet, behind the growing success, Spacek carried the lingering sadness of her past and the pressure of an industry that often demanded more than she could give, and the tragedies were only beginning. As Sissy Spacek's career accelerated in the late 1970s and early 1980s, audiences saw the rise of a powerhouse performer, someone who could transform emotional vulnerability into Oscar-caliber artistry. But while the world celebrated her, Spacek was fighting a very private battle: the crushing pressure of Hollywood's expectations and the emotional toll of roles that required her to repeatedly relive her own buried grief. Her Oscar-winning performance as Loretta Lynn in Coal Miner's Daughter brought her international acclaim, but few knew the psychological weight it placed on her. To prepare for the role, Spacek immersed herself completely, singing every note, mimicking every move, and absorbing Lynn's turbulent life. The emotional intensity of portraying a woman who endured poverty, loss, and personal hardship resonated deeply with her own past struggles. By the time filming wrapped, Spacek found herself drained in ways she had never experienced before, yet the industry demanded more. Directors wanted the same raw power she brought to Carrie in Coal Miner's Daughter. Studios expected perfection. She was nominated for multiple Oscars, and the pressure to maintain that level of excellence was overwhelming. It wasn't just about talent anymore. It was about surviving an environment where failure, even imagined failure, could destroy a career overnight. Hollywood began to take a toll on her mental well-being. Spacek was naturally introverted, someone who valued quiet, privacy, and simplicity. But fame stripped those comforts away. Everywhere she went, she was recognized. Every new project brought months of isolation, emotional strain, and public scrutiny. She once admitted that the constant demands made her feel like she was living inside a spotlight that never turned off. Her marriage to production designer Jack Fisk, one of the most stable and loving relationships in Hollywood, also faced its own challenges. While they supported each other deeply, the industry's relentless pace left little room for normalcy. The couple felt the strain as work pulled them in different directions. Filming schedules kept them apart, and Spacek's emotional state wavered under the weight of heavy roles. More than once, she came close to walking away from Hollywood completely, and then came another devastation, one that struck at the heart of every parent's worst fear. After years of moving between film sets and juggling the unstable lifestyle of Hollywood, Spacek endured a deeply personal maternal heartbreak, something she has rarely spoken about publicly. Although the details remain private, those close to her have acknowledged that she faced an emotional crisis tied to family and motherhood during the height of her career. The pain of that experience changed her priorities forever. She began to withdraw from big Hollywood productions, choosing instead to focus on her children, her marriage, and the quiet stability she never had as a rising star. This retreat from Hollywood wasn't a retirement, but a survival strategy. She turned down major roles, including blockbuster opportunities that could have made her even more famous. Critics wondered why she stepped away at the peak of her success. Some speculated she couldn't keep up with newer, younger actresses. Others thought she simply lost interest. But the truth was far more human and heartbreaking. Sissy Spacek was exhausted, emotionally worn down, and fearful of losing herself completely. Seeking refuge, she moved with her family to a secluded farm in rural Virginia, a world away from red carpets and film studios. There, surrounded by nature, she found the peace she had been missing for decades. But even in this sanctuary, the shadows of her past tragedies continued to linger. And soon, Another life-changing heartbreak would test her strength in ways she never imagined. Life on the quiet Virginia farm allowed Sissy Spacek to step away from the emotional chaos of Hollywood. But it did not shield her from the heartbreaks that were still to come. In the early 2000s, Spacek faced a profound and deeply personal tragedy, one that shook the foundation of her world and forced her to re-examine everything she believed about family, identity, and loss. This tragedy centered around a family member whose health crisis spiraled into something far more devastating than anyone expected. Although Spacek has kept the details private, close friends have acknowledged that she endured a long and painful period filled with hospital visits, uncertainty, and emotional exhaustion. The weight of watching someone she loved suffer, feeling powerless even with all her fame. All her resources, all her strength left scars she still carries today. During this time, Spacek's own physical health began to deteriorate under stress. Years of emotional strain had taken their toll. She developed anxiety symptoms she had never experienced before, sleepless nights, overwhelming worry, and periods of emotional withdrawal. For a woman who had always maintained calm, steady composure, these struggles were frightening. Acting, once her creative escape, now felt impossible. She turned down roles not because she didn't want to work, but because she simply couldn't bring herself to face the emotional demands. Meanwhile, Hollywood continued to move forward without her. New stars emerged. Studios offered her fewer roles. For the first time in her life, Spacek felt forgotten not by fans, but by the industry she once carried on her shoulders. The actress who once earned Oscar nominations with seemingly every major performance was now quietly slipping into the background. It wasn't intentional, but the combination of personal turmoil and Hollywood's relentless shift toward youth made her feel displaced, almost invisible. Despite her struggles, Spacek continued to support her family with the same strength she had shown since her teenage years. Her daughters later revealed that she would often comfort others even when she was falling apart inside. She had always been the emotional anchor of her home, and though she felt broken, she kept trying to be strong for everyone else. Yet tragedy was not finished with her. In the late 2010s, Spacek lost several close friends and collaborators in quick succession, people who had shaped her early career and supported her during its most difficult years. These losses hit her harder than the public ever knew. Each funeral, each goodbye, reminded her of the brother she had lost as a teenager. The grief she had carried all her life resurfaced with new intensity. Then came another heartbreak. A role she had hoped to return to a major comeback fell apart due to unforeseen creative changes. For an actress who rarely sought the spotlight, this opportunity had felt meaningful, almost like closure. Losing it was more painful than anyone outside her family understood. It wasn't about fame. It was about purpose. Work had always been a place where she could process her emotions, where she could turn anguish into art. Without it, she felt adrift. Through it all, Spacek held tightly to the love of her husband, Jack Fisk, who remained her constant. Their decades-long marriage had survived Hollywood, tragedy, and personal turmoil. But even the strongest marriages strain under the weight of prolonged grief. They leaned on each other, sometimes imperfectly, but always with love. In quiet moments on the farm, they talked about the life they built, the joys and heartbreaks, the dreams they still nurtured even as age and loss continued to reshape their world. By her mid-70s, Sissy Spacek had lived enough sorrow for several lifetimes. She had endured the pressures of fame, the loss of loved ones, her own internal battles, and the emotional cost of a career defined by vulnerability and intense roles. But the most heartbreaking chapter of her story was still unfolding. As Sissy Spacek entered her mid-70s, many assumed she would finally enjoy the quiet, peaceful life she had worked so hard to protect. But aging, with all its complications, brought emotional challenges she never expected, ones that deepened the sense of tragedy surrounding her journey. One of the most painful struggles she faced was the growing realization that time was slipping away far faster than she imagined. Friends her age were becoming ill, some passing suddenly, others fading slowly. Each loss reopened old wounds: her brother's death, the family tragedies of her adulthood, the creative loss she experienced when Hollywood shifted without her. Every goodbye felt heavier, as if the world she once knew was disappearing piece by piece. The once vibrant Hollywood community she had been part of for decades now felt like a distant memory. Many of her closest collaborators were gone. The roles offered to her were increasingly limited, often lacking the emotional depth she had built her career on. For someone who found meaning in storytelling, this was devastating. Acting had always been an emotional outlet, a way for her to transform pain into beauty. Without it, Spacek found herself confronting grief without the creative escape she'd relied on for so long. Her body, once capable of enduring intense film shoots, began reminding her of the toll that years of stress and emotional strain had taken. She faced mobility issues, chronic fatigue, and health scares that left her feeling vulnerable in ways she'd never known. Even though she kept most of these struggles private, those close to her noticed how she moved more slowly, how pain sometimes flashed in her eyes even when she tried to hide it. Through all of this, her Virginia farm, once a sanctuary, sometimes felt too quiet. She had built her life around peace, family, and solitude, but the stillness also brought long hours to think, to remember, and to feel the weight of everything she'd survived. The very environment that once healed her now forced her to confront her past with a clarity that was both grounding and heartbreaking. Her daughters, now grown with lives of their own, visited often, but the natural distance that comes with adulthood left Spacek facing long stretches of time alone with her thoughts. Mothers often feel this transition deeply, but for Spacek, whose identity had been built on protecting and nurturing others, the emotional emptiness was particularly profound. She worried constantly, not just about their safety and future, but about whether she had done enough, whether she had given them a better childhood than her own painful past. Despite her marriage remaining strong, both she and Jack Fisk faced the realities of aging partners, medical appointments, slower days, and the quiet fear of what would happen when one of them eventually faced life without the other. After nearly 50 years together, the idea of separation, even by time, was almost unbearable. Their love had survived Hollywood, personal loss, and private tragedy. But neither could escape the looming truth that no amount of love can stop time. And then came the moment that struck harder than anyone outside her family knew. The sudden passing of another close friend, someone who had been like family, left her shaken emotionally and spiritually. The grief was different this time. It wasn't just sadness. It was the terrifying recognition that she was now part of a shrinking circle, that life was entering a chapter where loss comes more frequently than joy. At 75, Sissy Spacek's life is a tapestry of extraordinary talent and extraordinary heartbreak. Her journey reveals the emotional cost of fame, the scars of early loss, the burden of grief, the quiet tragedies that unfold away from cameras, and the strength it takes to continue moving forward when life keeps taking pieces of your heart. And yet, despite the heartbreak, she remains a symbol of resilience, proof that even the gentlest souls can endure the harshest storms and still shine.